Ever felt like, navigating modern healthcare is just confusing and expensive? Like you're always chasing answers, maybe getting more bills than actual clarity.
Yeah, it's a feeling a lot of people probably recognize.
Yeah.
And that exact frustration, that sense of cost and maybe confusion, that's precisely where the source material we're diving into today kicks off. It lays out a pretty, well, blunt critique of healthcare right now.
Okay, interesting starting point. So let's get into it. This source introduces something it calls the nature's armor. Our plan today is really to unpack this source, figure out what it's claiming, what it's offering, and why it presents itself as like a totally different route to health.
Exactly. The source basically argues that the current system, for many folks, isn't really set up for genuine healing. It claims it's fundamentally profit-driven.
Profit driven. Okay.
And the source actually alleges it's even designed, to keep people sort of dependent on it
Yeah.
rather than truly getting well. It paints this picture of like spiraling costs and ongoing dependency.
Wow. Saying it's by design, that's a really strong framing of the issue. It kind of sets the stage perfectly for needing some kind of alternative, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And right against that backdrop, the source brings in nature's armor as its proposed solution. It's framed less like a specific product, more like a blueprint
Mm,
or guide. Basically, a different instruction manual for managing your well-being. Outside the system is just critiqued.
a blueprint. Right. And it mentions this guide is rooted in wartime wisdom. That sounds, well, it sounds pretty intense, actually. What does the source mean by that?
Well, the claim is that this wisdom comes from methods that were developed out of pure necessity, tested, supposedly, in really difficult situations, even battlefield-like conditions where, normal medical resources just weren't around.
Hmm.
It says it reveals over 100 battlefield-proven natural remedies. So the implication is these are practical, effective things discovered under serious pressure.
Battlefield proven. That definitely gives it a feeling of like urgency and real world testing. And the source makes some really specific, almost provocative claims about these remedies themselves, right?
It really does. The source claims these are remedies that your body sort of instinctively understands, that it can just work with them naturally.
Okay.
It also stresses that they're affordable, suggesting they won't hit your wallet hard, unlike the system it criticizes. And, maybe most notably, it makes the claim that doctors will, quote, never mention these particular methods.
Right, that bit about the doctors. That really draws a sharp line in the sand. It sort of implies these natural, supposedly affordable methods are being, what, hidden? Or maybe just overlooked by mainstream medicine? It raises a lot of questions from the source's viewpoint.
It definitely does. And just to give you a sense of the detail the source tried to provide within its own framework, it does tackle some practical questions someone might have if they were considering this path.
Like what sort of things?
Well, in its FAQ section, for instance, it apparently touches on how the remedies are supposed to work, how difficult they might be to make or use, whether there's any scientific
We
backing.
want the evidence question. Yeah.
Right. And also if you can use them alongside current medications and whether they're okay for different age groups, things like that.
Tackling those practical points suggests the source is trying to be, well, reasonably thorough for someone exploring this kind of alternative. And you mentioned it presents positive feedback too, like testimonials.
Absolutely, yeah. It highlights multiple five-star verified purchases, which is, a pretty standard way sources like this try to build credibility and show that others have found value.
Makes sense.
And it's also worth just noting that the source's structure, apparently, includes sections for both pros and cons. So it seems to attempt some kind of balanced perspective within its own narrative, even if we aren't diving deep into those specific points today.
Okay, so summing up then, this source really paints a very clear picture. You've got this sharp critique of modern healthcare on one side,
Right. The cost, the confusion.
and then contrasted directly with the promise of reclaiming your health through these accessible, historical, natural methods found in this Nature's Armor guide.
Exactly. It definitely invites you, the listener, to maybe step back a bit, to consider different ways of thinking about health and well-being, and perhaps question some of the, conventional assumptions.
It absolutely does. It kind of leaves you with this thought, if historical knowledge, maybe stuff discovered out of necessity, holds keys to health, keys that maybe are being overlooked by the modern way of doing things, well, how much potential healing wisdom are we actually missing out on today?